In this video, we're going to talk about spring maintenance and some of the things you should do to your Outdrive every 3 years. Hey everybody, welcome back. As you could hear from that intro, we're going to be doing some work on the Outdrive. Now, I recommend doing this stuff every 3 to 2 years. We're going to take this Outdrive completely off today, replace the impeller, and check the outer drive shaft, the U-joints, etc., and grease some things while we're in there. Let's get into it. Now, before we start tearing things apart to visually inspect them, I'm going to go over some of the things you're going to have on hand to complete this project. That is, if something else doesn't need your attention while you're in there. And the first thing is you're going to need some of this straight 90 weight marine grade gear lube. The other thing you're going to need is an impeller kit. With or without the housing, it's good to have one of these on hand, ready to go when you need them. You're also going to want to have muffs of some kind so that you can run your Outdrive and engine on the garden hose, making sure that everything is flowing the way it should flow. Now, there's a couple different designs. It doesn't really matter. They all do the same thing. It's just general preference which one you use. The first thing you're going to want to do is get your throttle in the all the way forward position, like so. The reason you want that throttle all the way forward is because there is actually a little mechanical mechanism in here that meshes between the cable drive system for the throttle and the mechanical shifting lever for the Outdrive. You want that all the way forward because it makes it possible to remove the Outdrive, and you're going to want to leave the throttle in that position until you're done with this. If you forget, you can damage things trying to get it back together. So the first step to any of this is going to be draining your Outdrive. And again, make sure that that seal is staying on this plug. Sometimes they like to stick up in the lower unit and fall out while the oil's draining, and you can miss it and put this back on, causing a leak without that seal. So make sure that that seal's on there. And if you want it to drain faster, you probably do, go ahead and remove your vent plug as well. Again, keeping an eye on that seal. They really like to stick onto the Outdrive. Once you get to the point you can actually start removing bolts, there's a couple things you have to note before you start tearing this thing apart. The first thing is your anode or trim fin. You want to note where that is orientated, because if you don't get that back the same way, it can cause a pretty severe pull. So the first thing you want to do is start by removing that anode. So once you get this off, it also gives you a good opportunity to double check the anode, make sure it's in good quality and it's not deteriorating or cracked anywhere. The anode acts as a sacrificial piece of metal, so this corrodes before anything else does. Also note that the Allen bolt that is in your Outdrive will not come out. It is trapped by the upper unit of the Outdrive. Once you get the anode removed, it will expose the other Allen, keeping the tail end of your Outdrive tight. You can remove that Allen now. Once you have all the Allens removed, go ahead and remove. There's a nut here on the other side and right in the back of the Outdrive that's really hard to show. You're going to want to remove those. I always start with the back nut because there's nothing obstructing it to take it all the way out. So start with that one, and you'll see why you need to start with that one in a minute. You have to remove these side ones in stages because you can't get the nut out all the way, because the case starts splitting in half, and that's what allows you to get the nuts out. Once you have both side ones loose to a considerable point, there's two more located just behind where your anode was. You can use a ratchet and a socket for those. Take those all the way out. Right about now, you should start seeing a little bit of a split in this case, and if we haven't missed anything, it should do that and start sliding apart. If you're not great with heavy objects, it may be a good idea to have a second person here just to help you muscle this out. Finish taking these nuts off all the way. Keep a hand on the bottom like this. And at this point, it should separate with minimal effort. Now, if there is any gear lube left in the upper half of the Outdrive, it's going to drip a little bit on the floor, so you may want to catch pan or a rag to catch that off. Now, if you want to proceed and remove this to inspect the outer drive shaft and your outside bellows, you're going to want to start by taking these plastic caps off of your hydraulic rams. Now, the next step you want to do is remove the lower and upper nuts on both sides of the upper half of the Outdrive. It's going to be a washer and some rubber bushings that may fall out. Generally speaking, it always seems to loosen on just one side. So you're going to have to work out this shaft while holding the Outdrive so it doesn't go slamming down on you. Once you get that out, there is another metal washer on the inside on both sides, and you're going to have a little water come out as you heard in that scene there. At this point, you can take the last two nuts off, followed by the washers that should be behind the nuts. And at this point, the case from the bell housing should be splitting already, and you can slide it off. Now, I'm going to note before I take this off, you're going to see that there is silicone from my bell housing to my Outdrive instead of the gasket. I am well aware that there's supposed to be a gasket there. I think the gaskets are kind of cheap, and I've actually seen them leak. So I prefer to use some black silicone at high temp. It doesn't have to be high temp. I just prefer it. Silicone seems to seal better for me, and for how often I take this Outdrive off, it shouldn't be an issue. Now, there's a couple seals and gaskets you have to be aware of here. The gasket I mentioned a second ago, and there's a gasket right here for your water feed. So you also want to make sure that that gasket stayed and that it is in good condition as well. You probably should replace it every time you're in here. It's not a bad idea to get a gasket kit for this job. Now, there's a couple other things you have an opportunity to inspect while this is off. You can inspect your bellows and see if they've been leaking or if they need any attention for tears, etc. You can inspect your throttle cable. Aside from checking the bellows, you can also inspect your gimbal bearing, make sure that that's not making noise and that it's well greased. So if you're happy with what you see on this side, now we can move to the Outdrive parts that we separated, inspect those and get everything back together so we can slide this all back together. Do you like that extra attention, huh? Yeah, you're a good Outdrive, aren't you? Oh, Hey, if this video is helping you out, hit that subscribe button because I'm always posting stuff like this and all kinds of other stuff that can help you out. And it helps the channel more than you could ever imagine, and it costs you nothing. So hit that subscribe button followed by the bell icon so you don't miss any of my other uploads. All right, let's continue the video. We're gonna check the easiest thing first, and that is the outer drive shaft going into the Outdrive from the boat. And the thing that scares me the most on these and why I like to check them is if these U-joints go, it is not good. It's really bad. They will take out a lot of stuff. Your bell housing, they'll take out the main mounting plate on your Outdrive that mounts the entire Outdrive. It's ugly. It's really, really bad. Don't ask me how I know. It's a sore subject. So I like taking this off, inspecting my seals here. That's just an added layer of protection. If you do get a little bit of a leak, it should somewhat help resist some water coming into the boat. Now the easiest way to check these is just visually. If you see anything out of the ordinary, if they look good, then you want to grab the U-joint. Now there's two of them on here. And simply just wiggle them back and forth with some tension on each side. And mine are good. Now the other nice thing about getting this out right now is it gives you access to the grease zerks on both of these U-joints. So you're already here, you might as well grease it up and make sure it's up to par for another 2 to 3 years. So once you're done inspecting the top half and greasing it up, you can put that off to the side until you're ready to reassemble. All right, moving to the lower half of the outer unit. This is where a lot of the more intensive work is gonna go. And I have a few hints for you along the way on this video of things that can really hang you up and really leave you scratching your head. And the first thing is you wanna note which way your prop spins, because it's going to be important when you go to put the new impeller in. Now, it should still be locked in the position, in the forward position from when you moved the throttle into the forward position on the boat. Meaning this little gear here, if you're standing exactly how I'm standing on the Outdrive with the prop facing away from you, it should be locked in the clockwise position, not counterclockwise. Clockwise is going to be your forward gear for the boat, not reverse, which means the prop should not spin when pushing downward. If you push the opposite way, it's going to push this out of gear and you're going to be in neutral. Now I can spin. So spin these teeth in the clockwise position, and now if you grab this shaft and spin it also in the clockwise position, that's going to show you which way the prop wants to spin. You can see it's pushing it this way, which means this shaft spins clockwise. So when you put this housing on, it's going to be crucial that you know which way the fins should be pushed in on the impeller. Because sometimes when you take these things apart, the impeller comes with it and you can be all kinds of confused and not know how it goes back together. I really had a hard time my first time doing this. Everybody has a first time, and I really want to help decipher as best as possible how to do this the right way to save you money and headaches. Boats are expensive enough without having to take them in. The first thing you're going to want to do is remove this seal on the shaft itself. It fits pretty snug, so it might be tricky, but with enough work it will come off. Go ahead and slide that off. Another thing, this seal, it should be right here. Sometimes it likes to stay in the upper unit. Mine did. So that's another thing to keep an eye out for. The next step is removing this little plastic bushing, followed by this copper one. It's just held in by a seal, so it will come out with enough finesse. And another thing you can do, if things aren't coming apart very good, is you can get some lubricant or WD-40 and spray it on some of these parts, and it should help once they start moving. It should help slip out a little bit better, and it's not going to harm anything in here whatsoever. The next thing you want to do is take these two middle nuts out, followed by the washers on the housing. Put them in a safe space. Followed by the rear nut, which is a different size. Not sure why they did that, but it is. And lastly, they have a little bolt in the back. Once you have all those out, the housing should slide straight up. Now there are a few things in here that could fall out, like a keyway. And if it's fighting you, you can use a flathead screwdriver again. Once you get that cracked open a little bit, you can spray some lubricant or WD-40 or something of similar nature in on these fins. Give it a spin and it should come off a lot easier. Now you're going to have a little keyway here that slides on a flat spot of the shaft. That's a pretty important part, and you really don't want it falling down in anything. So go ahead and grab it and put it in a safe spot also. And this gives you a better opportunity to check the impeller. And if you're going to replace these gaskets here, now would be the time also. But I still want to tear it down to the plastic housing and make sure that it is also in good shape. So everything looks good, and you can start assembling it reverse of removal. So we got one seal here we can put on, and it's something you're gonna have to keep an eye on right up to the very end of putting the two cases together. But that is your oil feed line from the upper half to the lower half of the Outdrive. Once you get your spacer and plates and gaskets reinstalled, you can put your new key that was in your kit in its home and slide the new impeller down, lining it also up with the key, like so. Now I like to wet this down a little bit. For two reasons. One, it's going to make installing this a lot easier, and two, it's not going to allow any damage to happen on the first dry start without water running through the system. Because even though you have the garden hose running, it may not be getting water all the way up to here for that initial couple seconds. So grab your new housing or old housing if you're just replacing the impeller like me, and slide that down also. So we know this shaft turns clockwise, which means the impeller has to go in here clockwise. So start pushing the fins in. And if you can't get it that way, you can always slide this back off and put it in manually. Just visually know that it spins this way, clockwise, depending on the orientation when you're installing it. So if you put it in the way I did, it should look like this. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be center. So slide it down. Once you have everything back in, you can put the little self-tapper type screw, which you should have a new one in your kit. Tighten that down snug. And the back bolt. Go ahead and tighten all these down snug. You don't want to over tighten this. You could warp the housing. You just want to go kind of just a hair past snug. Again, you can make sure that you didn't overdo it by spinning your prop shaft. Go ahead and slide this little rubber bushing seal thing back down. My kit also came with a new one of those and the little O-ring that goes here, so go ahead and slide that on. This brass water feed tube and the bushing that goes over it. The most crucial part here before you put the two halves back together is you want to make sure that that shifter I mentioned earlier, the little splines, are all the way clockwise until they stop, meaning that it's in gear, because that's what the boat is in gear at currently. So once you have that all squared away, make sure all your gaskets are still there, seals, etc. Like this little orange one here that I showed you. Grab the two nuts that go sandwiched in between, have those handy. Grab your upper half of the unit and start reassembling it. There we go. So as you saw there, it didn't want to quite go on. You may have to turn the U-joints a little bit or the prop to get the splines to line back up. Once it's popped on, it seems a little counterproductive, but you're going to have to lift it back up just a hair to get these nuts back in there. That's the most painful process of getting the two halves back together. After that, go ahead and tighten everything back down. You can even go ahead and put your anode back in at this point if you desire. Don't forget your Allen that goes underneath the anode. And the anode. Once you're done with this, it's back to the boat for the absolute hardest part, which is just muscling this back in and getting these splines to line back up with the splines on the engine side. This is also the point you're going to want to put some sort of sealant or the gasket, it's up to you, back on to the Outdrive so that it seals up good. There's a few things you want to keep in mind on the bell housing side of everything. You want to make sure that this fork is in line with this shifting mechanism. If you don't pay attention to that, it can cause some issues. You're also going to want to make sure that this seal stays. You can actually put a little bit of window molding glue on these if it doesn't stay, or just a little bit of grease. Get that in there. Get that in there. Sometimes you may get it on just far enough for the studs to come through, and then very, very carefully and slowly as you tighten these bolts down, making sure nothing's binding internally. And just like that, you're done. All you have to do is put the new gear lube in and run it on the garden hose. All right, after you get everything installed and you're pretty confident in your repairs or replacements, it's time to fire this thing up and make sure everything is working properly. And that is another job well done. If this video helped you out, hit the subscribe button and I will continue posting stuff like this. Let me know what you thought of this project, if it just looks like too much to do yourself and you'd rather just pay someone else to do it, or if it's something you tackle yourself all the time. That being said, thank you for watching and I will see you in the next one.
please subscribe to my dad's channel.